Let's see how the old TJ does going down this relatively gnarly little cliff face. I may hit, but you know what? Hitting is just part of the Jeep DNA. Tommy, on this episode of the Jeep Challenge, we're going to answer the age-old question: is it better to get a TJ or a JK? In other words, a cheap Jeep or an expensive Jeep. Isn't that right?
That's right. Today on the Fast Lane Car, we're going to plot some of the changes between the older Jeep Wrangler TJ and the new Jeep Wrangler JK, and we're even going to have some fun in the Colorado snow.
And we're going to let you know which one we would buy by the end of this video.
Well, we need to do some tests. I want to put it through a slip test, see how the four-wheel drive system works, and we need to take it up Goldmine Hill.
Really nice rig. Really want to thank you for bringing it in.
I don't know why I listened to my dad. I should have just brought the Land Rover.
Now, for all you non-Jeep guys and gals, let's talk about the generations of Wranglers. It starts with the YJ, then goes to the TJ, which was built from about model year 1998 to 2000. And what, Tommy? To 2006. Then you get the JK and of course the brand new JL. And the biggest difference between the TJ and the JK is under the hood. Ours has a 4-cylinder. It's a 2.5 liter that produces not a lot of horsepower. The engine you probably want in this car is the straight 6 4-liter, which produced about 180 horsepower when it was new. Now, we bought the 2.5 liter because this is a cheap Jeep and this is the cheap Jeep engine. But it all changed when you get to the JK.
So underneath the very flat hood of the JK, you'll find a 3.8 liter or a 3.6 liter V6. That's right, the straight 6 of the TJ left for the 2007 model year when the JK came out. Now these two engines, they're not super fantastic, especially the 3.8 liter was a little bit of a dog. But in this 2016, this 3.6 liter develops 285 horsepower and 260 pound-feet of torque. It may not be as cool as the straight 6 you found in the TJ, but it certainly is a lot more efficient, and that was a big deal for the Wrangler JK.
So Tommy, what kind of fuel economy are you getting?
Well, with the 35-inch tires, I'm getting about 16 miles per gallon in mixed driving.
Yeah, and with my lift and 31-inch tires, I'm also getting about 16 mpg, but how much horsepower do you have?
Well, I have over double the horsepower, 285.
And how much does yours weigh?
It weighs about 1,000 pounds more than that TJ.
So definitely, if you're going apples to apples, horsepower and fuel economy, you're much better off to go with the expensive Jeep than the cheap Jeep.
There's no apples to apples about this. This is like apples to hand grenades.
Yes, that's true. All right, Tommy, I think the biggest problem with the TJ is just it's very tight. It's a very small Jeep, which is great on the trail, but in here, if you're tall, big like me, it's a little cramped, even though we do have plenty of shoulder room.
Having said that, you get a lot of visibility with these really huge windows, which is really nice, and it's a lot of headroom as well, even with this hardtop on. One thing we got a lot of comments about in the TJ video we did, the last one, is why did we put such a small tire on it? And the thing is yes, we could have put a bigger tire on with this lift, but you gotta keep in mind, we're here at 8,000 feet with a 4-cylinder and an automatic, right? And we want to be able to still drive this on the road and drive it on the highway, and it just doesn't have the power to really turn a much larger diameter tire. So these are 31s. You know, the stance is a little bit funky, but it does what it needs to do. And of course, with $8,000 of upgrades like I have in my JK, this thing would be an off-road monster. The biggest limiting factor in this Jeep right now is the open diffs. I mean, there's no way to distribute power to a wheel that has traction. It just spins and spins. But that can be addressed fairly cheaply with a lunchbox locker.
The one good thing about these KO2s that we put on them is they've got really good snow grip. I really feel like, you know, even in this kind of somewhat deep stuff, I have a lot of grip. But in general, there's no traction. It's just old school, right? It's you, power steering, and your right foot determining where the power goes and it'll just go wherever the open diff is most spinny.
Yep, so it gets stuck pretty easily.
Yeah, you could easily spend $10,000 upgrading this.
Oh, easily.
And you wouldn't even have touched the beginning of what you can do.
Nope, for sure.
I think at this point we really need to talk about how much these Jeeps cost. Now, we bought the TJ for $6,500 and we've put about $3,000 or so into it. So let's call it $10,000 as it sits. We bought the JK for $32,000 and it's got about $8,000 worth of upgrades. So we're really looking at $10,000 to $40,000, or in other words, 4 to 1. And you want to keep this in mind while you're watching the rest of this video.
Okay, perhaps the biggest difference between these two Jeeps is just the size. The JK grew a lot. There was even the option for a 4-door Wrangler for the first time in Jeep history, but it also means you get a lot more creature comforts. The availability for 4 airbags instead of the 2 in the TJ. Of course, you have all the modern traction control, ABS system, satellite radio, Bluetooth, a great air conditioning, a good sound system. You get a lot more creature comforts in the JK than you do in the little TJ.
Tommy's absolutely right. You get a lot more creature comforts in the JK and a lot more modern technology that actually helps on-road. But when you're off-road, this TJ has all the basics covered. In other words, I've got the same low transfer case, I've got the same 4-wheel drive with open diffs, and best of all, I've got the same hardtop that comes off to make both of these Jeeps a wonderful convertible in the summertime, giving you that iconic Jeep Wrangler experience, and for a lot less.
Now, certain years of JK and TJ had different axles and different sized axles, but for the most part, the JK has a much beefier setup. For example, in this Sport Wrangler, I have a Dana 44 in the rear, where that TJ has a Dana 35 in the rear. Typically, the higher the number, the stronger the axle. And in this case, I have much stronger axles on this Sport JK. I also have traction control and a limited slip rear diff. Both of those make this thing so much more capable off-road than just standard open diffs.
Tommy's right. In all aspects of off-roading, that is a much beefier setup, except for one, and that is size. And size really does matter, and often bigger is not better, because the TJ is narrower and smaller, which lets you go to places that the JK can't think about just because it's too wide. The other thing that's identical on both of these is the fact that both have a 7-slot grille. Style-wise, these are both Wranglers, and I would wager that an average person would have a hard time telling a TJ from a JK on the street.
There are tons of subtle differences though that are actually pretty big when you really think about them. For example, this TJ has a, in my opinion, more iconic Jeep grille. For example, we've got the standard 7 slots, but the turn signals are right here on the fender, probably where they belong. We also have this unique sloping edge to the grille that the JK kind of lost. For that reason, a lot of people like the design of the TJ and the JL more than this JK.
So of course, what makes a Jeep is its ability to go off-road and in some ways rock crawl. Tommy, you think you can go down that?
Yeah, for sure.
You can certainly go down it. I'll try it in the TJ. I think it's going to be a little bit more butt clenchy.
Yeah, but you should do it.
All right.
It should be okay.
Let me go for it. Let's see how the old TJ does going down this relatively gnarly little cliff face. I just got it in first gear, since I don't have all that fancy traction control that Tommy has, nor do I have the descent control. I just have my foot. Oh, there we go. Oh, yes. Look at that, even in the snow, this thing makes it look easy. Lemon squeeze. And that is what Jeeping is all about. And that, whoa, that is...
You alright?
Yeah, I took a digger. The Jeep is better than I am off-road. No damage, just pride. Now let's talk about performance, or the lack thereof. With two different engine choices, this Jeep didn't have a lot of performance except for one exception. So this one has a 2.5 liter with the 3-speed automatic. And I gotta tell you, up here at over a mile above sea level, it's a dog, especially with the big wheels and tires and the lift. Now, there is one model of this TJ that is not a dog, and that is a 2003 or later 4-liter with the 6-speed manual. And that's the one you want if you want a true and fast performing TJ, especially if you live in Colorado.
Now, there was no 4-cylinder option in any JK. Depending on the year, you got one of 2 V6s and several transmission options. There were automatic transmissions, which were either a 4-speed or a 5-speed automatic, or there was a 6-speed manual transmission option. Now, in terms of performance, it was pretty good. It wasn't gonna blow your face off in a straight line. A V6 JK is pretty comparable to a straight 6 TJ in terms of straight line performance, but you know, it's a Jeep. They're meant to go off-road, not go to the drag strip.
Now, in terms of utility or space, this is a small Jeep, which is good and bad. It's good when you're on the trail, but it's not so good when you're sitting behind the wheel. I'm 6'2" and I've got plenty of headroom, but I certainly don't have enough legroom, and I've got the seat as far back as possible. The back seat, oh my gosh, it's tiny and it's super hard to get back there. Not very user-friendly. The instrument panel is very basic. I actually like the YJ's instrument panel design. I think it's a little bit more cool. This one has all the necessary controls that you want, but not exactly a very sexy way of presenting them. There was a long wheelbase version of this, the LJ. You can find them, but they're expensive and they're pretty rare.
The interior of the JK is, well, it's much nicer than the TJ. There was a big update in 2011 where they really dramatically improved the interior here. There are some similarities to the TJ, such as this oh-you-know-what bar, but in general, it's a much different design, much more user-friendly, and in my opinion, higher quality as well. Now, in terms of utility, even the two-door JK is better. The rear seat actually has a backrest and a real headrest, so you feel safe, and the trunk's a little bit bigger. But we have to talk about the 4-door JK. Now, Jeep says that over 70% of Jeep Wranglers sold are the unlimited 4-doors, and those have a much, much bigger back seat than either of these, and a huge trunk. So in terms of utility, the JK is far more practical, especially for a daily basis. Oh, and I almost forgot the Freedom Tops. This was a new feature for the Jeep Wrangler JK in 2007. It's these removable panels up here. Instead of having to take the whole top off, you can take off these 2 tops and have some fun in the sun without throwing out your back.
So Tommy, I love those Freedom panels, but what do you do with them once you take them off? They just go in the back and they bang around and get all scratched up.
Well, you gotta put them in your friend's TJ.
Okay, all right. And which of these two do you think is easier to upgrade?
Well, easier, I don't know, it depends. The design is somewhat similar underneath, but in terms of part availability, they built so many more JKs, and there are so many more vendors that'll sell you aftermarket bumpers and fenders and wheels and lights and lift kits, and the JK just has a much bigger parts catalog than the TJ. It's also newer.
And having said that, a lot of the parts that fit on that will also fit on this, so...
No, they won't.
Sure they will.
None of them will.
Sure they will.
No, they won't.
All those LED lights,
okay, yeah,
and
but
all those wheels and tires.
The wheels won't fit, the bumpers won't fit, none of the lift kits will fit. I mean, they're very different
What do you
underneath.
mean? The wheels fit?
No, the different lug pattern. Yeah, it's very different underneath. So, in terms of aftermarket support, the JK is definitely bigger.
Yeah, but don't be afraid of a TJ because there's still a lot of aftermarket support.
It's still huge, but it's not this big.
Yeah, and I think given your typical vehicle, there are more aftermarket parts than there ever will be for, let's say, a Camry or an Accord.
Okay, so here we go in the 21st century. Now, one thing you notice, obviously, this isn't an apples to apples comparison, right? I mean, we have very different modifications. But it is pretty similar of what you see on JKs and TJs. Some of them have really big wheels, some of them have smaller wheels. You've got bumpers and a winch. Both Jeeps have coil sprung suspension, but they're very different characters. I mean, this is much more civilized on the road. It's arguably better off-road out of the box with the traction aids, like the brake lock differential system. And it's got more ground clearance. It's just a bigger vehicle.
It doesn't feel as basic or traditional as the TJ. I mean, the TJ is not that far removed from the Willys Jeep, right?
Well, especially with the 4-cylinder.
Yeah, I mean, you're not sitting on the gas tank.
Right.
But you could draw a direct line from like the flat fender to the TJ. This doesn't feel like that anymore. It looks like that, but underneath there's just a lot more going on. Which
is good and bad. But this one, like JK was the first Jeep to have power windows, power door locks, power mirrors as an option, so they really civilized it, and a lot of people said they softened it up, depending on who you talk to, right? Well, I must say, as good as that TJ was in the snow, this is probably a little bit better.
Yeah, plus you got a winch if we get stuck, which makes me feel really good. All right, Tommy, you've now owned a YJ, we own a TJ and a JK. Let's take the YJ out of it, it's a little too old. Out of these two, which one would you rather own?
Well, because I'm driving it every single day in all sorts of weather and on the highway and on the freeway and on the back roads, the JK does everything the TJ does off-road, but it does the on-road bit so much better. So definitely the JK.
You know, to me, the TJ is like that golden, lovable retriever, right? It's just this wonderful mutt of a vehicle that you fall in love with. But I have to agree with you, as a weekend warrior, the TJ is great. As a daily driver, it leaves a lot to be desired. So I think if you want one Swiss Army knife Jeep, definitely go for the JK. The TJ is just a little too off-road focused for my daily use.
Yep. Well, guys, thank you so much for watching this episode of Cheap Jeep Challenge. Be sure to come back to tflcar.com for more fun off-road in the cheap Jeep.
One more episode, Tommy, and you know what that means. We're going to take the TJ to Moab and compare it against the Suzuki Samurai
and the Land Rover Discovery. That's coming up next.
Ciao.